Hillsong founder Brian Houston has been cleared of covering up the crimes of his paedophile father to protect the global church.
Brian Houston was once a man of strong influence and respect, but that image was shaken when the truth was revealed. This was not just a secret from the present, but something rooted deep in the past. Despite speaking strongly about same-gender relationships, Houston found himself facing heavy public criticism over his actions and decisions. As questions grow, things are not looking good for him or his ministry. Could this be the beginning of the fall of a ministry built over decades? Join us as we uncover the truth behind this revelation. The story before the spotlight. Brian Charles Houston was born in Auckland, New Zealand on the 17th of February, 1954. He was born into a family deeply involved in Christian ministry. His parents, Frank and Hazel Houston, were officers in the Salvation Army at the time of his birth. Their lives were centered on faith, service, and helping others, creating an environment that would shape Brian from a very young age. When Brian was 3 years old, an important change took place in his family's life. His parents joined the Assemblies of God in New Zealand and began leading a church in Lower Hutt, a city near Wellington. This move marked the beginning of a new chapter for the Houston family. It was in Lower Hutt that Brian spent most of his childhood years. Growing up, Brian was surrounded by a close-knit family. He shared his childhood with one brother and 3 sisters. Life revolved around family, church, and community. Being raised in a home where faith played such a central role meant that church life became a natural part of his everyday experiences. These early years helped shape his understanding of ministry and service. As he grew older and completed his schooling, Brian decided to continue his education at a Bible college. He spent 3 years there, studying and preparing for the future. Those years provided him with an opportunity to deepen his knowledge and strengthen his commitment to the Christian faith. The time he spent in Bible college became an important step in his journey into ministry. Not long after finishing college, a life-changing moment occurred. During a Christian convention held in New Zealand, Brian met a young woman named Bobby. Their meeting took place on Papamoa Beach, a setting that would become a memorable part of their story. What began as a chance meeting soon developed into a meaningful relationship. Their connection continued to grow, and they eventually decided to build a future together. In 1977, Brian and Bobby were married. Their marriage marked the beginning of a partnership that would play a significant role in the years ahead. But what happens when a young pastor starts with a simple church gathering? And how would years of success later be followed by some of the most difficult moments of his life? The expansion and challenges of Brian Houston.
That's why the Bible says to everything there's a season, a time for every purpose under heaven.
In 1978, Brian and his wife, Bobby, moved from New Zealand to Sydney, New South Wales, Australia. It was a new country, a new city, and the start of a new season. After arriving in Sydney, Houston joined the Sydney Christian Life Centre in Darlinghurst. There, he worked alongside his father, Frank Houston, serving as an assistant pastor. It was an important opportunity for a young minister. He was able to learn, gain experience, and become more involved in church leadership. But Houston did not remain in one place for long. In 1980, he started a church on the Central Coast. The following year, he worked at a church in Liverpool. These experiences helped him continue developing his ministry while serving different communities. Then came a turning point. In 1983, Houston took a bold step. He hired the hall of Balcombe Hills Public School in Sydney's northwestern suburbs. It was not a large building or a famous venue. It was simply a school hall. Yet, that simple location became the birthplace of something new. Houston started a church called Hills Christian Life Centre. The very first service was held on Sunday, the 14th of August, 1983. What began in a rented hall would eventually grow far beyond what many people could have imagined. As the years passed, Houston's influence within Australian Pentecostal churches continued to grow. In May 1997, he was elected President of the Assemblies of God in Australia following the retirement of Andrew Evans. This role placed him in a position of leadership within one of the country's major Pentecostal movements. A few years later, in February 2000, Houston helped create the Australian Christian Churches Network of Pentecostal churches. The alliance represented about 200,000 regular attenders across affiliated churches. Houston became its first president, taking on the responsibility of helping guide the network during its early years. He was also a member of the Australian Pentecostal Ministers Fellowship. While church leadership remained a major part of his work, another area of ministry was also growing rapidly. Houston founded Hillsong Music Australia, the music ministry of Hillsong Church. Music soon became one of the most recognizable parts of the church's identity. Over time, Hillsong Music Australia produced albums that reached large audiences. Two groups became especially well known. The first was Hillsong United, which grew out of the church's youth ministry. The second was Hillsong Worship, which reflected the worship ministry of the church and included members of the wider worship team. Every year, Hillsong recorded a live album. These recordings introduced new worship songs that were sung not only within Hillsong congregations, but also by church communities around the world. Many churches adopted these songs into their regular worship services. As a result, Hillsong's music ministry gained a global presence. Among the best-known songs associated with Hillsong were Mighty to Save and Shout to the Lord. The reach of the music extended beyond church buildings and into broader public settings. As Hillsong continued expanding internationally, another significant change took place. In September 2018, Hillsong separated from the Australian Christian churches and became an autonomous denomination. The church increasingly saw itself as a global and charismatic church movement. According to both Hillsong and Australian Christian churches, the separation was amicable. The two organizations parted on friendly terms while continuing their paths forward. For decades, Houston had been connected to growing churches, leadership roles, and a widely recognized music ministry. But the story would soon enter a much more difficult chapter. On the 5th of August 2021, New South Wales police issued a warrant for Houston's arrest. Authorities alleged that he had concealed the child exploitation committed by his father, Frank Houston. At the time the charge was made, Houston was in the United States. Following the arrest, he resigned from the church's board. The development attracted significant public attention and marked one of the most serious challenges of his career. The difficulties did not end there. In March 2022, Houston resigned from his position as senior global pastor following an internal investigation concerning his conduct with two women connected to the church. Reports stated that incidents involving inappropriate behavior had occurred in 2013 and 2019. The investigation and its findings led to his resignation from the leadership role he had held for many years. The events represented another major turning point. After decades of building churches, leading organizations, and overseeing a worldwide ministry, Houston was now facing a very different reality. Yet his public story did not end there. In December 2023, Houston announced plans to begin a new community and church in 2024. The announcement signaled the beginning of another chapter in his life. But why did some of Brian Houston's views attract so much attention? And how did his words become part of his public story? The statements that sparked debate. As Brian Houston's profile grew around the world, many people paid close attention not only to his leadership and ministry, but also to his views on important social issues. One area that drew significant public interest was his position on same-gender relationships. Over the years, Houston made several public comments on these topics. Because he was a well-known church leader, his statements were often discussed by supporters, critics, and media organizations alike. In August 2015, Houston explained Hillsong Church's position regarding marriage and same-gender relationships. He stated that he believed marriage was between a man and a woman. He also said that Hillsong welcomed all people, but did not affirm every lifestyle. Houston further explained that the church did not knowingly place actively gay people in leadership positions, whether those roles were paid or unpaid. These comments reflected the position he publicly presented on behalf of the church at that time. His statements became widely discussed because they touched on issues that many people felt strongly about. Some agreed with his views based on their religious beliefs, while others disagreed and expressed criticism. As a result, the conversation around his comments continued for years. The attention surrounding these remarks became part of the broader public discussion about Hillsong Church and its teachings. Since Hillsong had grown into a global church with followers in many countries, opinions about the church's position received considerable attention. Houston also made a personal statement about his father, Frank Houston, that attracted notice. He said that he believed his father was gay and described him as a closeted gay. Because Frank Houston had been a significant figure in the family's history and ministry, this comment generated interest and discussion among those following the story of the Houston family. However, this was not where the story was going to end. It was about to become a national issue. The allegations that changed everything. For many years, Brian Houston's rise in church leadership appeared to follow a natural path. He had spent years serving in ministry, building churches, and taking on greater responsibilities. Then, in May 1999, another major opportunity came his way. On the 10th of May, Frank Houston stepped down as senior pastor of Sydney Christian Life Center. Brian Houston was appointed to take over the position. At the time, the transition appeared to be a normal leadership change. Frank had been an important figure in the church, and Brian was already a well-known leader within the movement. The change seemed to mark the beginning of a new chapter. Looking back later, however, Brian would recall that his father appeared eager to hand over the church leadership. At that point, the public was unaware of what would later come to light. Only months after taking over the role, Brian received information that would have a lasting impact on his life and reputation. In October 1999, an allegation was made that Frank Houston had intimately exploited an Australian boy. The accusation was serious and deeply troubling. It placed Brian in an extremely difficult position. The accused person was not only a church leader but also his father. The situation became even more significant the following month. According to evidence later presented, Frank Houston confessed in November 1999 to child exploitation. The confession changed everything. Brian reportedly forced his father into retirement after learning of the exploitation. Frank's ministry career effectively came to an end. However, despite taking action within the church, Brian did not report the matter to the police. For years, the details remained largely out of public view. Then, more than a decade later, the issue returned to national attention. In 2014, Brian Houston appeared before hearings conducted by the Royal Commission into Institutional Responses to Child Exploitation. The commission had been established to investigate how institutions responded to allegations and cases of child exploitation. During the hearings, Houston spoke about what he had learned in 1999 and the actions he had taken afterward. Evidence presented to the commission revealed details about the allegation, the confession, and the decisions made at the time. The commission closely examined Houston's response. Its findings were highly critical. The Royal Commission censured Houston for not reporting the allegations against his father to police. It also criticized him for investigating matters involving his father while serving as national president of the Assemblies of God in Australia. According to the commission, this created a clear conflict of interest. The findings attracted significant public attention and placed Houston under intense scrutiny. Questions were raised about leadership, responsibility, and how allegations of exploitation should be handled. For Houston, the issue became one of the most challenging and controversial chapters of his public life. Yet the story was not over. Years after the Royal Commission hearings, legal proceedings began. On the 5th of August, 2021, New South Wales Police issued a warrant requiring Houston to attend Downing Centre Local Court in Sydney. Authorities alleged that he had concealed child exploitation committed by his father. At the time the warrant was issued, Houston was in the United States. The development quickly became major news. Following the charge, Houston resigned from Hillsong Church's board. The case drew widespread attention because of his high-profile position and the serious nature of the allegation. Houston was charged with concealing a serious indictable offense. The matter eventually proceeded to trial at Downing Centre Local Court. Throughout the proceedings, Houston pleaded not guilty. The case focused on whether he had unlawfully concealed information regarding his father's exploitation. As the trial unfolded, arguments were presented and evidence was examined. The legal process lasted for an extended period before a decision was reached. Finally, in August 2023, the court delivered its judgment. Houston was found not guilty. The magistrate concluded that Houston had a reasonable excuse for not reporting the matter. The judgment stated that Houston believed the victim did not want the allegations reported to police. That finding became central to the court's decision. At the same time, the victim testified during the trial that he had not made such a request. Even after the verdict, the case remained a subject of public discussion because of the complex issues involved and the long history surrounding the matter. For Brian Houston, the entire episode stretched across decades. But who stood beside Brian Houston throughout his journey? And what happened to one of his most well-known friendships? The personal side of Brian Houston. Behind Brian Houston's public life as a church leader was a family that remained closely connected to his work and ministry. Houston and his wife, Bobby Houston, made their home in Glenhaven, a suburb of Sydney, Australia. Over the years, their family became an important part of the story that many people associated with Hillsong Church. Together, Brian and Bobby raised 3 children, Joel, Ben, and Laura. As the years passed, all 3 children reached adulthood, got married, and became involved in the leadership of Hillsong Church. Ministry was a central part of Brian and Bobby Houston's lives, and also shaped the lives of their children. Through leadership roles within the church, the Houston family became closely connected to the organization Brian helped build. Across generations, from Brian's parents to his children, church leadership remained a defining theme. Beyond ministry, Houston was also known for his friendship with Scott Morrison, who publicly described him as a mentor in a 2008 parliamentary address. Their friendship attracted attention because Morrison would later become the leader of Australia, placing both men in the public spotlight. However, circumstances changed in later years. Following the events surrounding Houston's resignation from Hillsong Church, Morrison publicly distanced himself from Houston. The shift marked a significant change in a friendship that had once been openly acknowledged. The development showed how public controversies can affect even long-standing relationships. But what messages did he share with people searching for direction? And what did these books reveal about him? The ideas behind the ministry. Brian Houston is known not only as a church leader, but also as an author of many Christian books. His writings focus on faith, leadership, personal growth, and living a meaningful life. Across the years, he shared ideas meant to guide people in their daily walk with belief, decisions, and purpose. His earliest known book was Get a Life, written in 1996. It encouraged readers to think about direction in life and to look for a stronger sense of purpose. It marked the beginning of his writing journey. In 1999, he released 2 books. One was You Can Change the Future, which focused on hope and the belief that choices today can shape tomorrow. The other was You Need More Money, which spoke about practical living and managing life with a mindset of growth and provision. As his leadership influence grew, his writing also expanded into topics of relationships and personal development. In 2002, he published How to Build Great Relationships and How to Live a Blessed Life. These books focused on building strong connections with others and living with gratitude, faith, and stability. In 2003, he released How to Flourish in Life. This book continued his theme of encouraging people to grow, improve, and move forward in life with confidence. In 2004, he wrote How to Make Wise Decisions. This book focused on choosing the right paths in everyday life and thinking carefully before making important choices. In 2005, he published How to Live in Health and Wholeness. It focused on living a balanced life in mind, body, and spirit. In 2006, he released 2 books, Selah and For This Cause. These works continued his focus on reflection, purpose, and living with intention. In 2007, he published Selah 2, which explored reflection and spiritual growth in a deeper way. In 2008, he released For This I Was Born, centered on discovering personal calling and understanding life's purpose. Years later, his writing reached a wider global audience. In 2015, he published Live, Love, Lead, focusing on leadership, love, and strong values. In 2018, he released There Is More, encouraging readers to see greater possibilities beyond limits and pursue deeper meaning in life. If you enjoyed this video, like and subscribe, and also click the next video shown on your screen.